The scent of old books and my mother's lavender always clung to her. It was a comfort I hadn't realized I desperately needed until it was gone. Her funeral was a blur of hushed voices and damp tissues. I stood by the open grave, the cold earth a stark contrast to the warmth of her memory. My father, usually so stoic, looked impossibly frail. His grief was a heavy shroud, suffocating us all. My brother, David, stood a little apart. His face was a mask of controlled emotion. We hadn't spoken much since the diagnosis. He'd been so distant. I'd tried to reach him. He always pulled away. Now, seeing him there, a chasm seemed to open between us. It was wider than any argument we'd ever had. The pastor's words about eternal rest felt hollow. My mother was vibrant. She was life itself. How could she be gone? The reading of the will was a somber affair. Mr. Henderson, our family lawyer, cleared his throat. He was a kind man, but his voice couldn't soften the blow. My father sat beside me, his hand clasped over mine. David sat on the other side, his gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. My mother had left everything meticulously divided. The house went to my father, of course. The small cottage by the lake was for David. Then came my inheritance, a significant sum of money and a locked wooden box. Mr. Henderson explained. My mother had entrusted him with its key. He would give it to me when we were alone. Later that evening, after the last of our relatives had departed, I sat with Mr. Henderson. The air in the study felt heavy with unspoken things. He produced a small, ornate key from his pocket. It was antique, with intricate carvings. He handed it to me. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said softly. "She said it held important memories." My hands trembled as I took the key. I looked at my father, who nodded encouragingly. David was nowhere to be seen. He'd retreated to his room hours ago. I went to my mother's vanity. It was still there, just as she'd left it. A faint trace of her perfume lingered. The wooden box sat on the dressing table. It was dark mahogany, polished to a deep sheen. The lock was small and brass. My hand shook as I inserted the key. It turned with a soft click. The lid creaked open. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, were letters. Dozens of them, tied with ribbon. And a single, sepia-toned photograph. It was of my mother, much younger, laughing. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize. He had kind eyes and an easy smile. My heart pounded in my chest. Who was this man? My mother had always been devoted to my father, or so I thought. I picked up the topmost letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar. It was addressed to my mother. The date was from before she met my father. I unfolded it carefully. The words blurred through my sudden tears. It spoke of deep love, of stolen moments and whispered promises. It spoke of a child conceived, a child given up for adoption. My breath hitched. A child? My mother had another child? My mind reeled. I frantically opened another letter, then another. They were all from the same man, each one painting a picture of a passionate, secret love. And then, a letter dated a few months after my own birth. It spoke of heartbreak, of a difficult decision. He had been unable to care for the child. He had begged her to reconsider. But the letter ended with a plea. He wanted to know if their daughter was happy. He never stopped thinking of her. My hands were slick with sweat. I stared at the photograph again. The man's eyes. They held a familiar kindness. A kindness I saw in my father's face. No, that wasn't right. This man was a stranger. But the dates, the timeline, it didn't add up. My mother and father had married 2 years before I was born. They had been inseparable. Or had they? Were there secrets buried beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect family? I stumbled out of the bedroom, the letters clutched in my hand. My father was in the living room, staring out the window. He looked lost. I couldn't bring myself to speak. The weight of these revelations was crushing. I looked at him, really looked at him. Had he known? Had he lived with this secret all these years? Or was this a betrayal he was unaware of? The man in the photograph shared a striking resemblance to David. A chill ran down my spine. David, who had been so distant. David, who had always felt like the outsider. I walked over to my father. He turned, his eyes questioning. I held out the photograph. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling. "Who is this man?" He took the photo, his brow furrowed. He stared at it for a long moment. His face paled. He looked from the photograph to me. Then, he looked towards the stairs, where David's room was. A dawning horror spread across his features. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The silence in the room was deafening. It was filled with the ghosts of unspoken truths. My father finally lowered the photograph. His hand trembled as he reached for his chest. "Oh, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You never told me." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain I'd never witnessed before. It was a pain that cut deeper than any loss. It was the pain of a lifetime of deception. Or was it something else? Had my mother confided in him? Had they both carried this burden together? I sank onto the sofa, the letters still in my lap. The weight of them felt immense. "Dad," I said again, my voice barely a whisper. "Who is he?" He sat down beside me, his body slumping. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength. That's a man named Thomas," he said, his voice raspy. "He was Eleanor's first love, before me." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "They were very young. Their families, they didn't approve." He opened his eyes and looked at me, his gaze steady now, though etched with sorrow. "Eleanor was pregnant," he continued. "Thomas wanted to marry her, but her parents, they threatened to disown her. They sent her away to have the baby." My stomach clenched. And the baby?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "They arranged for the adoption," he said. "Eleanor was heartbroken. She never forgot." He looked away, his gaze drifting towards the window again. "She met me a year later," he said, his voice softer now. "We fell in love. I proposed. She accepted. But she never told me about Thomas. Not the full story." He turned back to me, his eyes pleading. I suspected something. She was always so quiet sometimes, so distant, especially around your birthday." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I thought it was just her nature, her quiet way." He looked down at the photograph again. "I never knew about this, about Thomas." A wave of confusion washed over me. "But David?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. "The man in the photo. He looks so much like David. My father's eyes widened in a fresh wave of shock. He stared intently at the photograph, then at me. He seemed to be putting pieces together, pieces that had remained hidden for decades. "David," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. He shook his head slowly. "No, that's impossible." He stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "Eleanor and I, we tried for a long time to have children," he said, his voice strained. "It wasn't easy. Finally, you came along. Then David, we were so blessed." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his face etched with a dawning realization. "But David, he was born 6 months after you. It was a difficult pregnancy for Eleanor. She was always so frail then." He paused, his gaze fixed on me. The implication hung heavy in the air. He walked over to the fireplace, picking up a small, framed photograph. It was of him and my mother, younger, radiant. He traced the outline of her face with his finger. "Eleanor was a good woman," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "She loved us. She loved you both. She carried so much pain." He turned back to me, his eyes glistening. Perhaps she kept this from me out of fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of losing you." He walked back to the sofa and sat down, his hand finding mine again. This time, his grip was firm. "Thomas. He was her first love," he repeated, "and she never forgot. But she chose us. She built a life with me, with you." He looked at the letters in my lap. "These are her memories, her heart." He squeezed my hand. "And Thomas, he was a part of her past, but not our present." A profound sadness settled over me. The idealized image of my mother, the one I had cherished, was shattered. But in its place, a more complex, human woman emerged. A woman who had loved deeply, who had made difficult choices, and who had carried her secrets with grace. I looked at my father. His quiet strength, his unwavering love, even in the face of such a profound revelation, was immense. He had been betrayed, perhaps, but he had also endured. He had loved my mother through it all. I looked at the photograph of the unknown man again. Thomas. He was a ghost from my mother's past, a ghost that had cast a long shadow. But he wasn't David's father. My father's words, his quiet conviction, settled the matter. David was his son, my brother, my father's son. The man in the photograph was a painful reminder of a love lost, but it didn't define my mother. It didn't define my father, and it certainly didn't define David. The weight in my chest began to lift. The secrets were out. The truth, however painful, was revealed, and in its revelation, there was a strange sense of liberation. My mother's life was more complicated than I had ever imagined, but her love for us, I knew, had been real, unquestionably real. I looked at my father. He was watching me, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding.
Like a secret.
"What do we do now?" I asked, my voice soft.
Echoing
He offered a
percussion.
small, gentle smile. "We remember
A
Eleanor,"
heartbeat
he said.
shadow.
"We remember her love."
Dark.
We remember her strength. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the door. And we talked to David, together.
Heavy with unease.
The thought of confronting David with this news was daunting.
Distant rumble,
He had withdrawal so much already,
like
but he
footsteps
deserved
in
to know.
fog.
He deserved the
Slow,
truth, and I needed to understand his
each
distance.
beat a warning.
Perhaps this explained it. Perhaps he had felt it too. The
Twisting
unspoken,
into a dissonant
the
wail.
things left unsaid.
Pen's pulse,
I stood up,
a
gathering
deep
the
inhale
letters.
before
My
silence.
father rose with me. We
The
walked
final
together
beat
towards the
lands,
stairs. The house felt
heavy
different now,
as regret.
less like a sanctuary of perfect memories, and more like a place where real, flawed people had lived
Pens
and
fade
loved.
into nothingness.
The scent of lavender was still there,
A single
a faint
note
echo,
bending away.
but beneath it, I could now sense the quiet
Silence
strength of my mother
returns,
and the enduring love
but the
of my
tension
father.
remains.
We found David sitting on the floor of his room, his back against the bed. He looked up as we entered, his eyes guarded. He had been crying. I could see it now, the raw pain beneath his usual reserve. I sat down beside him, my father on my other side. I held out the photograph. "David," I said softly, "we need to talk." He took the photo, his gaze fixing on the man's face. His expression shifted from guardedness to bewilderment. He looked from the photo to me, then to our father. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. My father put a hand on David's shoulder. "That's Thomas," he said gently. "He was your mother's first love." David's eyes widened. He looked back at the photograph, then at his own hands. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "Mom?" he whispered. I opened my mouth to speak, but my father spoke first. "She loved him very much, David," he said. "But things were complicated. She had to make a choice." He paused,
Slow,
his gaze steady on David. "She chose a different path.
smut track with deep
She chose me. She chose us."
dark, smooth,
He looked at David,
and heartbeat
his eyes
like
filled
rhythm.
with a deep love. "And
Feels like investigating
I chose her, and I chose you.
No blow.
You are my son, my beloved son." David looked at our father, then at me. The guardedness in his eyes began to melt away. He looked lost, but also, for the first time in a long time, truly seen. He clutched the photograph tightly. "So, she never—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I reached out and took his hand. "She never forgot him," I said softly. "But she loved us. She loved us fiercely." Tears welled up in David's eyes. He didn't try to hide them this time. He leaned his head against my father's shoulder. My father wrapped an arm around him. I joined them, creating a small circle of shared grief and newfound understanding. The secrets were out. The pain was real, but so was the love, the enduring, unconditional love that bound our family together. Even in its brokenness, it was still strong. We sat there for a long time, the photograph of Thomas resting on the floor between us. The silence was no longer filled with unspoken things, but with shared emotion. David finally spoke, his voice muffled against my father's shirt. "I always felt different," he confessed. "Like I didn't quite fit." My father held him tighter. "You fit perfectly, son," he said, his voice firm. "You are more than enough." I looked at my brother, my heart aching with a love I hadn't fully appreciated before. He was my mother's son, yes, but he was also my father's son. and he was my brother. That was what mattered. The truth had brought pain, but it had also brought a profound sense of connection. We were no longer separate islands of grief. We were a family, bound by shared history, and by a love that had endured all challenges. My mother's secrets had been a heavy burden, but now that they were revealed, they no longer held power over us. They were simply a part of her story, a story that had shaped us, but that did not define us. We would carry her memory forward, not with illusions, but with a deeper, more honest understanding. The lavender scent in the air seemed to soften, like a comforting embrace. The house felt lighter. The future, though still uncertain, felt more hopeful. We had each other, and that, in the end, was everything. My father cleared his throat, his voice raspy. "There's something else," he said, his gaze still fixed on David. David looked up, his eyes questioning. "Mom, she wrote things down for us." He gestured towards the stack of letters in my lap. "These are her thoughts, her confessions, her love." David slowly reached for the letters. His fingers, still trembling slightly, brushed against the aged paper. He picked up the topmost one, his brow furrowed in concentration. The handwriting was familiar, yet somehow alien. It belonged to his mother, but the words spoke of a life I had never known. He began to read, his lips moving silently. The room fell silent again, save for the soft rustle of paper. Minutes stretched into an eternity. David's expression shifted with each word. Confusion warred with a dawning comprehension. He would pause, reread a sentence, then sigh, a soft sound of resignation. His shoulders, which had begun to relax, tensed once more. I watched him, my heart aching. I knew the weight of these words. I had carried it myself, albeit for a shorter time. Finally, he lowered the letter. His eyes, red-rimmed, met mine. There was a profound sadness there, but also a glimmer of understanding. She tried to explain," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "About Thomas. About everything." He looked at my father. "She loved him. Truly loved him." My father nodded, his own eyes glistening. "She did, David. And she loved us. That's the truth of it." He reached out and squeezed David's shoulder. "She made a choice. A difficult choice. But it was her choice. And we accept it. We understand it." David looked back at the letters, then at the photograph of Thomas. He traced the man's face with a fingertip. "He looks kind," he observed, his voice softer now. "I wish I could have known him." "Perhaps," my father said, his voice gentle. "In a way, you do. He's a part of your mother's story, a part of who she was." He paused, then added, "And that story is a part of you." David nodded slowly. He seemed to be absorbing this new perspective. The anger, the confusion, the sense of not belonging. It was all starting to recede, replaced by a quiet acceptance. He picked up another letter, his movements more deliberate this time. He opened it and began to read. I watched them, my father and my brother, finding solace in the words of the woman they both loved. It was a fragile peace, born from sorrow, but it was peace nonetheless. The lavender scent in the air seemed to deepen, a comforting presence in the room. The house no longer felt haunted by secrets, but filled with the echoes of a love that had endured. As David continued to read, my father leaned back against the sofa, his arm still around David's shoulders. He looked at me, a small, knowing smile on his lips. It was a smile of relief, of shared understanding, of a burden lifted. We had navigated the storm, and we had found our way back to each other. The journey had been painful, but the destination was worth it. We were a family, bound by more than just blood. We were bound by truth, by forgiveness, and by a love that had proven stronger than any secret. I picked up the photograph of Thomas again. He was a stranger, yet he was intimately connected to my own past. He represented a life my mother might have lived, a path not taken. But the path she did take was the one that led to me, to David, to us. And that was enough, more than enough. David looked up from the letters, his eyes brighter now. She wrote about her dreams for us, he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. About how much she wanted us to be happy, to be close. He looked at me, then at our father. She succeeded, he whispered. My father's smile widened. He squeezed David's shoulder. She did, son. She absolutely did. He then turned his gaze to me, his eyes holding a depth of emotion that words couldn't capture. You both are her greatest legacy. The weight of the past was still present, a gentle hum beneath the surface. But it no longer felt oppressive. It was a part of our history, a testament to the complexities of love and life. We had faced the shadows and emerged into the light together. The house, once a repository of unspoken grief, now felt like a home, filled with the quiet strength of a family united. The future stretched before us, a canvas waiting to be painted, and we would paint it together, with honesty, with love, and with the enduring memory of the woman who had brought us all here. David carefully placed the letters back on the coffee table. He looked at my father, then at me. A genuine smile finally graced his face, a smile that reached his eyes. Thank you, he said, his voice clear and steady. For telling me, for helping me understand. My father returned the smile, his eyes full of pride. Always, son, always. He then looked at me. And thank you, my dear, for bringing these to light, for helping us all find our way. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. We had unearthed a painful truth, but in doing so, we had also unearthed a deeper connection. The lavender scent, I realized, wasn't just a memory of my mother. It was a symbol of her enduring love, a fragrance that permeated our lives, reminding us of where we came from and who we were. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, a sense of quiet peace settled over us. The secrets were no longer a burden, but a shared history. The pain had not vanished, but it had transformed, becoming a foundation for a stronger, more honest bond. We sat there, a family, no longer defined by what was hidden, but by what was finally revealed. The silence was no longer awkward, but comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of shared experience. David reached out and took my hand. His grip was firm, confident, a silent promise of support. My father's hand rested on David's other shoulder, a paternal anchor. I looked at them, my heart full. We had lost a mother, a wife, a woman of quiet strength and hidden depths, but we had found each other, anew, in the aftermath of her truth. The faint scent of lavender still clung to the air, a gentle reminder of the past. But it was no longer a scent of sorrow. It was a scent of resilience, of love, and of the enduring power of family. The unspoken had been spoken. The hidden had been revealed. And in the quiet space that followed, a new chapter began. A chapter of honesty, of acceptance, and of a love that had weathered the storm and emerged, stronger than ever before. The weight had lifted, and in its place, a profound sense of calm. We were together, and that was everything. My father looked at me, a question in his eyes. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. I looked at David, who met my gaze with a soft smile. "Whatever we do," David said, "we do it together." I nodded, a sense of quiet anticipation settling over me. The future felt vast, but not daunting. We had faced the truth, and now we could face anything. My father's question hung in the air, a gentle invitation. It wasn't about grand plans or immediate decisions. It was about acknowledging our shared present. I saw David's smile, genuine and unwavering. He had finally found his footing. His journey had been the most turbulent. Mine had been a winding path of discovery. Our fathers had been a constant through it all. Together, I echoed David's sentiment. The word felt solid, a promise. It was more than just an answer to a question. It was a declaration of our new reality. We were no longer adrift. We were anchored. My father's gaze softened as he looked between us. The lines of worry etched around his eyes seemed less pronounced. "That's all that matters," he said, his voice filled with a quiet contentment. He squeezed David's shoulder again. "We'll figure it out, whatever it is." He chuckled softly, a sound I hadn't heard in a long time. It was a sound of relief. It was a sound of peace. David released my hand, but his eyes remained connected to mine. He picked up one of the letters again. This time, he didn't read it silently. He began to speak the words aloud. Her voice, translated through his, filled the room. It was a voice that spoke of hope. It spoke of forgiveness. It spoke of a love that transcended regret. "My dearest boys," David read, his voice clear and resonant. "If you are reading this, then I have finally found peace. I pray that peace has also found you." He paused, his voice catching slightly. He took a deep breath. "I know I have caused you pain. My choices were selfish. My deceptions were born of fear." I watched my father. His gaze was fixed on David. He looked like a man at peace with his own past. He had accepted his wife's truths. He had embraced his sons. The weight he had carried for so long seemed to have finally lifted. He was present. He was here. David continued reading. The words painted a vivid picture of my mother's inner turmoil. She described the immense pressure she had felt. She spoke of a world that offered few choices. She detailed the desperate measures she had taken. It was a confession. It was an apology. It was a plea for understanding. "Thomas was a good man," David read, his voice softer now, more reflective. "He loved me, and I loved him. But I was afraid of the consequences, afraid of losing everything. He looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting mine. There was no judgment there, only a shared understanding. She was trapped, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was a realization that had been dawning on me. Her actions, though wrong, stemmed from a place of desperation. She had made a choice, a terrible choice, but she had made it to protect us, in her own misguided way. My father nodded slowly. She was a product of her time and her circumstances. He spoke with a quiet wisdom. He had lived through it all with her. He had known her struggles. He had loved her through them. David returned to the letters. He read about her hopes for our future. She envisioned a life where we were close. She dreamed of us sharing laughter. She longed for us to be a united front. Her aspirations for us were clear. Her love for us was undeniable. I want you to know, David read, his voice filled with emotion, that every single day I regretted my silence. I longed to tell you the truth, but the fear was too great. Please forgive me. He closed the letter gently. He looked at our father. She really did love us, didn't she? She did, David, my father confirmed, his voice firm. With her whole heart, she didn't know how to show it. Not in the way she should have. He reached out and gently touched David's hand. But she tried. In the end, she tried. The room was filled with a quiet reverence. We were no longer just sons. We were inheritors of a complex legacy. We were keepers of a profound truth. The secrets were out. The pain was acknowledged. Now, there was only the space for healing, the space for rebuilding. I looked at the photograph of Thomas again. He was a ghost in our lives, a specter of a different path. But he was also a part of my mother's story, a chapter she had kept hidden, a chapter we now understood. He had been loved, and his love had shaped her. It had shaped us, indirectly. David picked up another letter. This one was shorter. It was a final message. It was a farewell. He read it with a quiet solemnity. It spoke of her peace. It spoke of her hope for our reunion. It was a message of love. It was a message of release. My dearest boys, David read, his voice thick with unshed tears. Live your lives fully. Love each other fiercely. And know that I will always, always be with you. He set the letter down. He looked at me. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. I reached out and took his hand again. This time, it was me who squeezed his. He didn't pull away. He met my gaze. His eyes, though filled with sadness, also held a newfound strength. He was no longer the lost boy I had feared he would become. He was a man who had faced his past. My father stood up. He walked over to the window. He looked out at the setting sun. The light bathed his face in a warm glow. It was a peaceful image. It was a man at peace. He had done his best. He had loved his wife. He had raised his sons. She was a complicated woman, he said, his voice thoughtful. But she was our mother, and we loved her. He turned back to us. His eyes held a deep, quiet love. And she loved us. That's what we hold on to. David nodded. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. She did. He agreed, his voice stronger now. She really did. He looked at the letters. He looked at the photograph. He looked at
Feels like
me.
investigated in
A small smile returned to his lips. So, he said, his voice lighter, what's next? He glanced at our father. Together? My father smiled. It was a genuine, heartfelt smile. Together, he confirmed. He walked back to the sofa. He sat between us. He placed an arm around each of our shoulders. We were a unit, a triangle of strength. I looked at my father. I looked at David. The scent of lavender still lingered in the air. It was no longer a scent of sorrow. It was a scent of remembrance. It was a scent of enduring love. It was a reminder of where we came from and who we were. I think, I began, my voice steady, we should start by having dinner. Together. David's smile widened. I like that idea, he said. My father chuckled again. Dinner it is. He squeezed our shoulders. And then we'll see. One step at a time. The weight of the past had not vanished. It had transformed. It had become a part of our shared narrative. A narrative of love, of loss, and of resilience. The house felt different tonight. It felt like a home filled with honesty, a home filled with hope. As we stood up, ready to face the evening, a new understanding settled between us. The secrets were no longer a barrier. They were a bridge to a deeper connection, a bridge to a shared future. The lavender scent seemed to wrap around us, a comforting embrace. We were no longer separate islands. We were a family. And in that moment, that was everything. The door creaked open slightly, revealing a sliver of the darkening sky. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of the lavender bush just outside the window. My father stood, his movement slow and deliberate. He walked towards the kitchen, a familiar path he'd trod for decades. David and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between us. We would follow. We would navigate this new landscape together. The kitchen was bathed in the soft glow of twilight filtering through the window. The scent of lavender was stronger here, mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of old wood and a hint of something savory, perhaps from a meal long past. It was a comforting sensory tapestry. I think, my father began, his voice a low rumble. I'll make us something simple, something that doesn't require too much thought. He opened a cupboard, his hand hovering over a ceramic bowl. A stew, perhaps. It's good for the soul. A slow-cooked stew. David nodded, his gaze still soft as he watched our father. That sounds perfect, he said. His voice held a quiet sincerity, a genuine appreciation for these small, grounding gestures. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil he had endured. The letters had laid bare his mother's pain, but they had also revealed her enduring love. That love, now understood, seemed to be a balm. I moved to the refrigerator, opening it to survey its contents. We have some good root vegetables, I offered, pulling out a bag of carrots and a few potatoes. And some onions, that will add depth. My own voice felt steadier now, less burdened by the unspoken. The honesty, though painful, had been liberating. It had cleared the air in a way I hadn't thought possible. Our father smiled, a gentle crinkle at the corners of his eyes. Excellent, he said. He took the vegetables from me, his hands surprisingly steady. He began to peel the carrots with practiced ease. The rhythmic scrape of the peeler was a soothing sound, a counterpoint to the emotional storm we had just weathered. It was a sound of normalcy. It was a sound of continuation. David moved to the sink, turning on the tap to wash the vegetables. The gentle rush of water filled the quiet space. He worked efficiently, his movements economical. He had always been observant, picking up on cues, anticipating needs. This trait, once a source of confusion, now felt like a strength. He was attuned to the subtle currents of emotion. "Did she ever mention Thomas to you?" David asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. He looked at our father, his expression open and vulnerable. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. It was a direct inquiry into a hidden part of our mother's life. My father paused his peeling. He looked at David, then at me. His gaze was thoughtful, not evasive. "She mentioned him," he said slowly. "Not by name, at first. She spoke of a friend, someone who offered her comfort, someone she confided in." He resumed his task, his movements deliberate. "It was only later, when she was unwell, that the name Thomas surfaced more frequently." I leaned against the counter, absorbing his words. My mother's confidences, shrouded in fear and secrecy, were slowly being illuminated. It was like piecing together a fractured mosaic. Each fragment, once revealed, offered a clearer picture of the whole. The image was complex, not easily defined by simple labels. "She felt he understood her," I said, more to myself than to them. "She felt he saw the pressures she was under." It was a logical deduction based on her letters. She had sought solace in a world that seemed to offer little. Her choices, however flawed, stemmed from that deep need. Our father nodded. "She carried a great burden," he agreed, "and she believed she had to carry it alone." He placed the peeled carrots in a bowl. "She was a proud woman, and fear can make even the proudest feel vulnerable." His words resonated with a quiet understanding. He had witnessed her struggle firsthand. David finished washing the vegetables and placed them on a clean towel. He then moved to the spice rack, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What herbs go well in a stew?" he asked, his voice laced with a touch of uncertainty. It was a question that revealed his unfamiliarity with domestic routines. His upbringing had been different. "Rosemary and thyme," I replied, stepping forward. "A bay leaf too, if we have one." I opened another cupboard, searching for the dried herbs. The scent of them, sharp and aromatic, filled the air. It was a familiar comfort. It was a taste of home. Our father chuckled softly. "You always were the cook, Ilara," he said, his voice warm. "And David," he added, turning to his younger son, "you have a knack for making things right. You have a good heart. That's more important than knowing every spice." He placed a reassuring hand on David's arm. It was a gesture of acceptance. It was a gesture of love. David's shoulders relaxed slightly. He offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," he said. He took the rosemary and thyme from me. He began to measure them out, his movements careful and precise. He was learning. He was adapting. He was finding his place. As we worked, a comfortable silence settled between us. It was a silence filled with shared purpose. It was a silence that spoke of rebuilding. The kitchen, once a space of quiet routines, now felt like the heart of our renewed family. The clatter of pots and pans, the gentle hum of conversation, the shared task of preparing a meal. These were the building blocks. The stew began to simmer, its rich aroma filling the house. It was a scent of comfort, of warmth, of sustenance. It was a promise of nourishment, both physical and emotional. As we waited for it to cook, we sat at the small kitchen table, the day's events still fresh in our minds. The weight of the past had not entirely disappeared, but it had shifted. It had become a shared burden, made lighter by our collective presence. What do you think she would have wanted for us, truly? David asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. He looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the deepening twilight. The question was profound, reaching beyond the superficial wishes in the letters. It delved into the core of her maternal desires. My father stirred the stew, the spoon clinking against the pot. She wanted us to be happy, he said, his voice steady, truly happy. And she wanted us to be together. That was always her deepest wish, I believe. He looked at us, his eyes reflecting the warm light of the stove. She made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but her love for you both was never in doubt. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. It was true. Her love, though expressed in flawed and painful ways, had been a constant undercurrent. It was the force that had driven her actions, even when those actions were misguided. Now, we understood the source of that force. We understood its complexity. She just didn't know how to navigate it all, I added, echoing my father's earlier sentiment. The world she lived in, the expectations placed upon her. It was a difficult truth, but an important one. It allowed for a more nuanced understanding of her life. It allowed for a measure of empathy. David reached out and took my hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. "We'll make sure we're happy," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "And we'll make sure we're always together." He looked at our father, his gaze unwavering. "We'll honor her wishes in our own way." A sense of profound peace settled over me. It wasn't the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. It was the quiet strength of family. It was the resilience of love. The stew continued to bubble, a gentle reminder of the simple, enduring things. The scent of lavender, still present, was no longer a mournful reminder. It was a sweet, persistent note of remembrance. My father smiled, a deep, contented smile. He squeezed David's hand. "That's all she ever wanted," he said. He looked at the pot, then back at us. "And it's more than enough for all of us." He stood up, his movements a little stiff. "Let's get some bowls. Dinner is almost ready." As we prepared to serve the meal, a faint sound drifted in from outside. It was the distant chime of a church bell, marking the hour. It was a sound that, in another time, might have felt like an intrusion. But tonight, it felt like a gentle punctuation mark. It was a signal that the day was drawing to a close. It was a signal that a new chapter was beginning. We were together, and the future, though still unwritten, felt full of possibility. The aroma of the stew was rich and inviting, wrapping around us like a warm embrace. As my father spooned the hearty mixture into our bowls, a sense of quiet anticipation settled over us. We had faced the truth, and now we were ready to move forward, one shared meal at a time. The first spoonful was a revelation. Rich, savory, and deeply comforting, it filled us with a warmth that spread from our stomachs to our very souls. The vegetables were tender, the broth infused with the subtle perfumes of rosemary, thyme, and the ghost of a bay leaf. It was more than just food. It was nourishment for our weary spirits. "This is incredible," David murmured, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. He took another slow, deliberate bite. "I haven't tasted anything like this." His voice held a genuine wonder. He was experiencing a simple pleasure that had been absent from his structured, perhaps sterile, upbringing. I watched him, a small smile playing on my lips. "It's just a simple stew," I said, though I knew it was more. It was the culmination of shared vulnerability. It was the taste of peace. It was the flavor of family finally finding its footing. Our father nodded, his gaze sweeping over both of us. "It's good to eat together," he stated, his voice imbued with a quiet satisfaction. He had always valued these moments, even when they were brief and hurried. Now they felt earned. They felt precious. The church bell chimed again, a softer, more distant echo this time. It marked the passing of another hour, but it no longer felt like a deadline. It felt like a gentle rhythm, a steady beat against which our fragile new beginning could unfold. The twilight outside had deepened into a velvety darkness, punctuated by the faint glow of distant streetlights. The kitchen, bathed in the warm light of the overhead lamp, felt like an island of calm in a turbulent world. "Do you think she knew?" David asked, his voice almost swallowed by the contented silence that followed our initial praise of the stew. He pushed a stray piece of carrot around his bowl with his fork. The question was hesitant, tentative, as if he feared the answer. He was still grappling with the complexities of their mother's life. My father paused, his spoon hovering over the stew pot. He considered the question, his brow furrowed in thought. "I believe," he began, choosing his words carefully, "that she hoped for the best. She hoped we would find a way through. She hoped for our happiness, even if she couldn't always provide it herself." His gaze met David's, a silent acknowledgement of their shared uncertainty. It was a difficult legacy to inherit. I reached for my water glass, the coolness a welcome contrast to the warmth of the stew. "She was trying to protect us," I offered, a gentle assertion. "In her own way. She saw dangers we didn't. She felt pressures we couldn't comprehend." It was an attempt to frame her actions with understanding, to soften the edges of her mistakes. "But her protection came at such a cost," David countered, his voice tinged with a familiar melancholy. He looked down at his hands, his fingers tracing the rim of his bowl. The pain of his childhood, the fractured sense of belonging, was still a raw wound. He was still processing the impact of their mother's choices. "I know," my father said softly. He reached across the table and placed his hand over David's. "And for that, we will always carry a burden. But we are together now. That is what matters most." His words were a balm, a reassurance. He was acknowledging the pain, but also offering a way forward. He was offering a united front. The stew was almost gone. The simple act of sharing a meal had brought us closer than any words could have. It had created a space for honesty, for forgiveness, and for a nascent sense of hope. The clinking of spoons against ceramic was a gentle music, a soundtrack to our quiet rebuilding. As I finished my last bite, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. It wasn't for the stew, though it was delicious. It was for the presence of my father and brother. It was for the shared understanding that had bloomed between us. It was for the quiet strength that had emerged from the ashes of our past. "What happens now?"
Trembling.
David asked, his voice barely audible.
Like a secret.
He looked up, his eyes searching our faces. The question was loaded with uncertainty, with the fear of the unknown. He was accustomed to having his path laid out for him, to following directives.
Dark, bad
This new freedom was exhilarating, yet
stretching into
daunting.
the void.
My father squeezed David's hand. "Now,"
Heavy
he
with
said,
unease.
his voice firm. "We live. We live the lives she wanted for us, but on our own terms. We build our
Like
own
footsteps
happiness.
in fog.
We create our own future."
Slow,
He looked at me, then at David,
each beat
a deep love
warning.
shining in his eyes. "And we do it together."
Dreams shiver,
I nodded, a sense of purpose
twisting
settling
into a
within me.
dissonant wail.
"We start by taking it one day at a time," I added, "by being present for each other. by offering the support she couldn't always give. The path ahead was not clear, but it was no longer shrouded in fog. It was illuminated by the faint glow of shared intention. David finally looked up, a flicker of something akin to excitement in his eyes. He managed a small, tentative smile. "One day at a time," he repeated, as if tasting the words. He looked around the familiar kitchen, the space that had once held so much unspoken tension. Now, it felt like a sanctuary. The last of the stew was scraped into a communal bowl. The remnants of our meal sat between us, a testament to a shared experience. The silence that followed was different now. It was not the silence of unspoken pain, but the comfortable quiet of understanding. It was the peaceful hum of a family finding its rhythm. My father rose from the table, his movements still a little stiff, but filled with a new energy. "I think," he said, a twinkle in his eye, "that a cup of tea would be in order." He looked at us, his gaze warm and inviting. "And then," he continued, "we can talk about what tomorrow might bring." David and I exchanged a look. A shared smile passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of the journey ahead. The prospect of tea, of further conversation, of the unfolding possibilities of the next day, felt not like an obligation, but like a welcomed invitation. The weight of the past had not vanished, but it was no longer crushing. It was a foundation upon which we were now building something new, something stronger, something that felt, for the very first time, truly like home. The faint scent of lavender still lingered in the air, a gentle reminder of what had been. But now, it was overlaid with the rich aroma of stew and the promise of shared conversations. The chime of the church bell, now a distant memory, had given way to the soft murmur of our voices, the gentle clinking of cups, and the quiet, hopeful beat of a family united. The kettle whistled, a cheerful, insistent sound that cut through the deepening quiet. My father poured the hot water into our mugs, steam swirling upwards, carrying the faint, comforting scent of Earl Grey. He handed one to David, then to me, his hand lingering for a moment on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a silent affirmation of our shared journey, of the bond that was now being forged, thread by precious thread. David took a sip of his tea, his eyes closed again. "This is good too," he said, his voice softer now, less burdened. He was learning to appreciate the small, quiet pleasures. He was learning to be present. "It's the simple things, isn't it?" I replied, stirring a spoonful of honey into my own mug. The sweetness was an echo of the sweetness that was finally finding its way into our lives. My father sat down, his gaze thoughtful. "It is," he agreed. "And sometimes, the most profound things are found in the most ordinary moments. This meal, this conversation, this tea." He looked from David to me, his eyes filled with a quiet pride that made my chest ache. "I've waited a long time for this." The unspoken words hung in the air between us. For us to be a family again. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the steam from our mugs warming our faces. The kitchen, once a place of hushed secrets and veiled anxieties, now felt like a haven. The shadows that had once lurked in its corners seemed to have receded, banished by the warmth of our shared presence. David cleared his throat. "So," he began, his voice still a little hesitant, but with a new steadiness to it. "What do you think tomorrow might bring?" My father smiled, a slow, knowing smile. He took a sip of his tea, savoring it. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice taking on a thoughtful cadence, "will bring whatever we make of it. But I can tell you this, it will bring more laughter. It will bring more understanding. And it will bring more of this." He gestured around the table, encompassing us all. This connection, this strength. I felt a surge of warmth, a deep, resonant peace. It was the feeling of finally being seen, of finally being accepted, of finally belonging. The years of unspoken pain, of fractured relationships, of feeling like an outsider in my own family, were beginning to fade. They were being replaced by something solid, something real, something that felt like coming home. "And the lavender?" David asked, his gaze drifting towards the window, as if seeking a connection to the outside world that had so long been a source of his mother's distress. "Will we still have that?" My father's expression softened. "Always," he said. "The lavender was a part of her, and now it's a part of us. A reminder of where we came from, and of the love that, in its own complicated way, she always tried to give." He paused, then added, his voice laced with a gentle humor. "Though perhaps, from now on, we'll plant some more. And maybe some rosemary and thyme. A whole garden of memories." David chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that surprised even himself. It was a sound that held a hint of the joy that had been so long suppressed. I looked at my father, at the lines etched on his face, lines that spoke of a life lived fully, of love and loss, of resilience and unwavering devotion. He had carried so much for so long, and now, finally, he could share the burden. He could rest. "You know," my father said, his voice growing quieter, more introspective, "there's something I never told you both, something I should have said years ago." He looked directly at David, then at me, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Your mother, she wasn't just protecting us from perceived dangers. She was also trying to protect herself." A flicker of confusion crossed David's face. "Protect herself from what?" he asked. My father took a deep breath. "From her own fears, from her own regrets. You see," he began, his voice lowering, becoming almost a whisper. "Before you two were born, she had a different life. A life she believed she had to leave behind. A life that, in her darkest moments, she felt she had betrayed." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. This was new territory. This was a revelation that shifted the very foundation of what we thought we knew. "What kind of life?" I prompted, my voice barely above a breath. My father's eyes grew distant, as if he were looking back through time. "She was an artist," he said, the word carrying a weight of unspoken sorrow. "A painter. She had a real gift, a passion. But the pressures of the world, the expectations, they became too much. She felt she had to choose between her art and, well, between her art and what she thought was a more stable future. The future she believed she owed to her family, to me." David's brow furrowed. "But she never painted," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Not once that I remember." "Precisely," my father said, his gaze meeting mine. "She put it all away, buried it, and with it, a part of herself. She convinced herself that it wasn't important, that it was a childish pursuit, that it would only lead to disappointment." He paused, his voice catching slightly. She lived with that regret for years. It festered. It made her brittle. It made her afraid. A profound sadness washed over me. The woman who had always seemed so distant, so controlled, had been a prisoner of her own unlived dreams. Her protectiveness, her anxieties, her sometimes baffling pronouncements, they were all rooted in this deep, unspoken loss. "So," David said slowly, his voice filled with a new understanding. Her fear of us following a similar path, that was her own fear projected onto us. "In large part, yes," my father confirmed. "She saw the struggles of the artistic life. She saw the potential for heartbreak, and she wanted to shield you from it. She wanted to ensure you had security, stability, even if it meant stifling your own true desires." The lavender, its scent had always been so evocative of her. Perhaps it wasn't just a symbol of her presence, but a symbol of her suppressed creativity, a quiet rebellion against the life she felt she had to live. The fragrant blooms, so delicate yet persistent, mirroring the artist she once was, hidden beneath layers of practicality and fear. "She was afraid," I murmured, the realization settling deep within me. She was so afraid of us experiencing the same kind of pain she felt she had inflicted upon herself. My father nodded, his hand reaching out to cover mine. And in her own way, she was trying to protect us from that pain, from the consequences of her own choices. It was a flawed protection, and it caused its own share of hurt. But it came from a place of love, a complicated, often misguided love. The silence that followed was different again. It was not just comfortable, it was contemplative. We were processing a new layer of understanding, a deeper empathy for the woman who had shaped our lives in such profound, if often painful, ways. Then, my father's expression shifted. A subtle change, a spark in his eyes. He stood up, his movements still a little stiff, but now imbued with a new purpose. "You know," he said, a gentle smile spreading across his face, "I kept some of her old things she boxed up and put away years ago, things I couldn't bring myself to discard." He walked over to a cupboard in the corner of the kitchen, one that had always seemed to hold nothing but forgotten odds and ends. He opened it, and from the back, he pulled out a large, dusty portfolio. He placed it on the table between us, the worn leather creaking softly. "I found this," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "When I was clearing out the attic last week, I'd forgotten all about it." With trembling hands, I reached out and unlatched the heavy clasps. The portfolio swung open, revealing a treasure trove of vibrant color. Canvases, sketches, charcoal drawings, landscapes bathed in golden light, portraits that captured the very essence of their subjects, bold abstracts that pulsed with raw emotion. It was her, the artist, the woman we had never truly known. David gasped, his eyes wide with astonishment. "She was incredible," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. He reached out, his fingers hovering over a vibrant depiction of a sun-drenched field of poppies. My father watched us, his smile widening. "She was," he agreed. "And I think," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the opened portfolio, then settling on us, his eyes shining with an unexpected, hopeful light. that it's time we brought her back. He looked at me, then at David, a shared understanding passing between us. The fear, the regret, the unlived dreams, they were no longer a shadow. They were a legacy that we, together, could honor. We can frame some of them, I suggested, my voice filled with a newfound excitement. We can display them. We can share her talent with the world. David nodded eagerly. And maybe, he said, his eyes alight with a spark that mirrored his mother's artistic passion. Maybe we can even find some of her old paints, see if they're still good. My father's hand rested on David's shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. Perhaps, he said, his voice resonating with a deep, abiding love. Perhaps we can, and perhaps, he added, his gaze returning to the portfolio, to the vibrant life captured within its pages. Perhaps we can even start to paint our own futures, with all the color and passion she so bravely set aside. The scent of lavender, now intertwined with the rich aroma of tea and the faint, evocative scent of oil paints, filled the kitchen. It was the scent of remembrance, yes, but now it was also the scent of rediscovery, of a family finally, beautifully, and powerfully finding its true colors. The future was not just unwritten, it was a blank canvas, waiting for us to fill it with our own vibrant, honest, and shared art. We looked at each other, a silent promise passing between us. We would honor her past by living our own futures, fully and fearlessly, with every stroke of our own unique creations. The final chapter was not an end, but a glorious, colorful beginning.